The Process Podcast, breaking down the daily habits, processes, and tools of high achievers. Now, here's your host, Brad Wilson.
Hey there, boys and girls. This is Brad Wilson, the host of the Process Podcast. As always, if you haven't yet taken the opportunity to subscribe to our show, I would very much appreciate it. And if you love a particular show, feel free to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spotify, however it is that you are consuming this specific episode. Today's guest is Michael Sorensen. At the age of 22, Michael confronted an addiction that had been plaguing him for many years. And like any world-class problem solver, when confronting a problem that's been confounding them for a number of years, he sought out an expert in the form of a therapist. In our conversation, we talk about how that decision eventually led him down the road to writing a book on communication, despite having no degree and not considering himself an expert. There was just something inside of him that he needed and felt that he could share with the world and add tons of value. And that book, I Hear You, the surprisingly simple skill behind extraordinary relationships, is now transforming the way people communicate worldwide. It's being translated into multiple different languages as we speak. In this episode, you'll learn why Michael believes everyone needs a therapist, how to predict the future success of your relationships in their current form, and also how to take immediate action in improving your chances of success, a simple communication skill that has game-breaking potential in how you communicate, and much, much more. Without any further ado, here's my conversation with the awesome Michael Sorensen. Michael, how are you doing this morning?
Doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Excited to talk about your story and your book. I think we'll start out by, let's describe life leading up to you going to see a therapist.
Sure. So I want to say 21, 22, and I've been struggling with an addiction to pornography for most of my life, honestly, since I was about 8 years old, battling this addiction, and never really wanted to call it an addiction. I think like most people with addictions don't. But I reached a breaking point around, I think it was probably 22 actually, where I just realized I wasn't able to get a handle on it. And I didn't like feeling out of control in my life, in any aspect of my life. And so a friend had recommended a therapist, and I started meeting with her for actually once a week, and then pretty soon started going into group therapy once a week as well. So I was meeting in some form of therapy or another 2, sometimes 3 days a week for a number of years. And it wasn't, of course I got help for my addiction. I kept going for that long though, because pretty quickly I realized how valuable it was as just life coaching. I was finding, when you're healing any addiction and really, working through any family issues or what be it, there's a lot that you have to work through. It's not just, stop doing this, start doing that, right? You start to dive in and realize, I need to learn how to manage stress better. I need to learn how to communicate better. I need to learn how to, just basically improve life skills. And so going to therapy, while it helped me heal from the addiction, really transformed my life in so many ways, because I learned valuable life skills. I learned how to be a better boyfriend, a better sibling, a better son, a better father. I mean, all these side benefits, to the point that now I sing the praises of therapy as much as anything else. I'm like, dude, everybody needs a therapist, like even if you don't have an addiction or something, because there's so much value in having an outside perspective, especially someone who's professionally trained to say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you looked at that? Let's talk through these things here. So that's kind of what got me going toward this path of writing this book and the things that we'll talk about today.
So let me go back. You mentioned that the addiction to pornography started at 8 years old.
Yeah.
As a father of a 7 and 9 year old, that's a little disconcerting. How does something like that happen at such a young age?
I still ask myself that question. I just remember we had a TV in the basement, and I remember flipping through the channels. I was by myself, and something came up on TV that, I don't even think that it was nudity per se, but it definitely wasn't something an 8-year-old should be seeing. And I still remember I immediately ran back upstairs and, just burst into my mom's room and started bawling and said, I think that I've seen pornography. And
At 8?
at 8, I knew that it was, because
Wow.
our church talks a lot about it, the dangers of it and everything. So even at 8, I knew that it was a bad thing, but I didn't really know what it was. I just knew, you shouldn't see people without their clothes on and that type of thing. And so it was scary as an 8-year-old. And my parents, I saw the fear, in their eyes immediately, because they, just like you, like, oh my gosh, my 8-year-old, like, what do I do here? And so they, of course, did their best to help me, but that was the earliest memory I have of it. And, but even right there was shame surrounding it, and shame, of course, is what fuels addiction. And so it's tough because a lot of people don't like to talk about it, myself included, because it's still kind of this awkward topic, if you will, in society today.
Yeah, but I think it's something that lots of people struggle with. So knowing that there's people out there that have overcome that specific issue is therapeutic and is social proof that no matter if you do feel shame, you can work through it. There is a way out.
Absolutely.
So you felt it was wrong very early on. What was the inciting incident that made you pull the trigger and go to therapy?
That's a great question. I think that it was truthfully just basically a lifetime of fighting it unsuccessfully. I, of course, had periods of, it wasn't just constantly an issue for me, but I realized, from 8 to 22, you realize something's got to change here, or nothing's going to change. Like, I have to do something different. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about how our best thinking got us here, right? Like, of course, we did our very best, and yet here we are. And so I just hit this point where, for the 1,000th, 2,000th time or whatever, I had relapsed, and it was so disheartening because I wanted to have a real intimate connection, with my wife whenever I met her. I wanted to make sure that I was present, that I didn't have really anything that would tear my, for lack of a better term, soul down. I didn't feel like I was living fully present and living the life that I knew I could. I mean, I don't consider myself a bad person by any means, but it's just not a great feeling to feel like you can't get something under control in your life. And so that was it for me when I just finally hit that relapse where I was like, I'm done. Like, I have got to find something here.
Yeah, I think it's a sign of maturity, especially at 22 years old, hitting the wall and seeking help, because I don't think I would have at 22 years old. The human brain isn't fully developed or isn't fully mature till 25. So, yeah, you're for sure ahead of the curve, and I commend you for recognizing there's a problem and then making yourself uncomfortable to solve it.
Thank you.
So speaking of relationships, as a young man, 22, going to therapy, you came across an article that had a pretty profound effect on your life. Could you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually kind of a funny story. So it was about 22, maybe 23. I had been going to therapy for maybe a year, could have been 2 years. And I had started learning about, a lot of different relationship principles and things, and, working on myself. And at the time I was dating a girl who, she was great in so many ways, and yet there was something lacking from our relationship, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I had distilled it down to, I don't feel like she really listens to me, but I realized that wasn't quite true. And the story that I always share is I was out with her. We were on a date. We were just walking around somewhere, and I was sharing with her something that happened in the day. I was pretty excited about it, and I'm explaining it, and I tend to get into my stories. Hands are moving, everything. Oh, it was so cool. This and that, this and that, and the whole time she was just kind of nodding her head and smiling, and so I finished telling my story, and I turn over to her, and she just looks at me and goes, "Cool," and that was it. And I remember looking at her like, that's all you're going to say. Like, it's kind of a letdown. Like, I didn't say this, but in my mind, I'm like, really? Like, I felt like she wasn't connected to me, or that she wasn't appreciating what I was going through or something. But I remember.
How did it make you, how did it make you feel?
I closed off pretty quickly, honestly, because I didn't feel like she cared about me. And that's a very, blunt thing to say, but in hindsight, looking back, that's how I felt, where I was just like, come on. Like I was obviously wanting to connect with her, but again, still at 23, whatever, I didn't really know that. All I knew is something was off. I wasn't feeling connected to her, and I didn't know what it was.
Knowing how you feel now, do you still think that she didn't care?
No, I think she did care. I think she just didn't have the tools. I don't think she had the tools to show me that she cared, for lack of a better term. We talked about it later, but yeah, I think she did care. I think she was just kind of like, I don't really know how much more to communicate with you. It's just, that's cool. I can tell that you're happy, Right. And so there's a certain element of like, well, she was trying, but again, I didn't really know how to help her. I didn't even know how to explain what I was feeling. So, I just kind of closed off. I mean, we ended the date or whatever. I went home that night, and I hopped on my computer and I just started scrolling through Facebook. I'm like, And within like 30 seconds, I came across an article that said, science says lasting relationships come down to two basic traits. And since I had just felt like my relationship wasn't so great, I clicked on the link, and it took me to a blog post that talked about some research done by a psychologist named John Gottman. He does a lot of research on marriages and relationships. And he and a colleague of his, they put together a study where they decorated their lab to look like a beautiful bed and breakfast. And they invited a bunch of newlywed couples to come in over a weekend and just do what they normally do, hang out, cook breakfast, talk, relax. But they agreed to be observed, which sounds kind of creepy. But, John and his colleague kind of watched their interactions, and they wanted to see what made the strong couples strong and the weak couples weak. And they recognized that couples would make small requests for connection throughout each day. And they were very small, right? It might be something as simple as the husband seeing a car drive by and going, man, look at that car. And then they realized that the wife in that instance now had an opportunity to respond. She could respond actively, oh, that's awesome. That's a cool car. Or negatively, oh, I hate that color. Or kind of passively, just, that's nice, dear. Not really paying attention. And what they found years down the line is that the couples who were together and happy, I think it was 6 years later, they turned toward each other, or they had positive reaction to each other's bids. I want to say it was like 8 out of 10 times. Whereas the couples who were divorced or together but very unhappy only turned toward each other 3 out of 10 times. And so there was a drastic difference there in just those small nuances between the couples that really set their marriage on a completely different trajectory. And so I read that, and literally this like flood of insight and validation and frankly vindication came in, where I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I was lacking earlier this evening. Like I was telling her about this exciting thing, and she was just responding passively, just, oh, that's cool. And I realized at that time, having been through therapy now, that what I was looking for was validation, is the term that I had learned in therapy, which is basically feeling heard and understood, right? I wanted her to respond in the same manner that I was feeling. Oh, that's so cool. I can't believe that happened. That's what I was looking for. But because we didn't have that connection and she didn't have those tools, our relationship fell flat.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Are the couples who respond positively 80%? Is that because their connection is stronger, their communication skills? Is it a mixture of both? Or are the couples that only respond 30%, or the partners that respond 30% of the time, is it a reflection of them being dissatisfied in the relationship, or not as happy, not as engaged as they could be? Basically, is it a symptom of something else, or is it something that can be actively changed and improved upon?
Honestly, I think it's both. Obviously, I wasn't there during that particular research, but since writing the book and observing much more closely now, all my interactions and other people's interactions, I think there's a mix of both. So obviously, if you're not happy in your relationship, if you're not feeling connected to the other person, then you're not going to validate them because you don't really care what they're feeling, right? And so I think you're spot on there, that first you have to make sure that you care about the person and that you try to empathize with what they're feeling. I will also say that I have seen in other relationships that there are people who do care. They wrestle with knowing how to show they care. And so that's where I have found that even for me, learning the skills of validation and learning some of these nuances has helped me better show that to people. And I've also been able to help teach other people who say, you know what, my wife is so frustrated with me. We never, we just butt heads all the time. And when I teach them about validation, when I help them realize that their wife isn't really looking for advice necessarily in that instant, she just wants some validation. She just wants them to connect with her. I get email after email, people saying this completely saved my marriage. My relationship with my girlfriend is better than it's ever been. And a lot of this happens in a day, literally, because they just change the way they approach things, and it makes a night and day difference.
So give me an example of validation, a real world in a conversation. Husband and wife are talking, you and I are talking, and validation versus, the sort of blasé, yeah, or, oh, that's cool. Cool,
sure.
Cool story, man.
Yeah. Right. Well, I think that, if it's you and me talking, let's say that we're coworkers, right? And we're out to lunch. And if you come to me and you're like, dude, you'll never believe what happened. I was out, I can't think of an exact example, but you're super excited about it, right? And if you're talking to me and sharing it with me, an invalidating response might just be, oh, that's cool, man. But clearly I just want to focus on something else. Versus if I'm validating you, I want to get in it. I can tell that you're excited. And so I want to be excited with you. Like, no way, that's crazy. That happened? I can't believe that. Another example, honestly, where people have a harder time is when someone's sharing a difficult issue, right? Or they're frustrated. So if you come to me instead and say, oh my gosh, I can't stand, Jake at work. He's a total idiot. He takes credit for everyone's work, blah, 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 blah. Most people's reactions, especially if I know Jake, would be to back him up or to, correct you and say, oh, come on, man, he's not trying to be rude. And then you'll probably push back and be, but dude, he's just said X, Y, and Z. We're kind of getting this little argument. Whereas if I validate you instead, I just recognize that you're feeling frustrated and I can jump into your shoes and say, dude, if he said that, I'd be just as ticked. I don't have to agree with you that he's a jerk, but I can say, well, yeah, if he said those things to me, I would be upset. And that oftentimes will take people's walls down. They'll feel understood at least and go, thank you. Yeah. And then if I want to, I can offer to share my opinion or give you some feedback. But first and foremost, just the simple validation of understanding how you're feeling and basically giving you permission to feel that way.
I love that. And I have to say that after reading your book, I'm already trying to implement it more in my own life because I see how my communications have gone awry in certain situations. And a specific situation in my life where I know that I haven't been very great at validation is when somebody tells me something that makes me uncomfortable or something that obviously, yeah, I guess uncomfortable is the right word. Whether it be like an addiction, somebody coming to me about an addiction or a problem they're experiencing, some sort of personal thing. My gut instinct is to be like, yeah, I get it. Maybe you should do this, this, and this. Like that's my like, oh, go read this. I read this. I've dealt with that same thing. The validation aspect. It's very simple too. It's only takes a few seconds and it connects with the emotion, right? That's the major purpose of validation. Could you tell me a communication skill that people are taught that you think doesn't do the job as well as validation?
Absolutely. I kind of mentioned this in the book. Again, in my research, I came across a method or a technique known as active listening, which is basically just repeating back to the other person what they said to you. And so on the surface, it sounds the same as validation, but I have found that in practice, it comes across as very robotic and very disconnected. So I've had a few people use air quotes active validation on me, and immediately it just falls flat, right? So I remember I was on a phone call with a buddy. I was actually in one of my recovery groups, and I was like, dude, I had this project at work. They changed the date on me 3 times. I was super frustrated. And he was still learning how to validate. And he just basically repeated back verbatim what I had just said to him. He's like, okay, so let me see if I got this right. You're frustrated because they changed the due date on you 3 times, and now you don't know what to do. And I remember I just sat there and I was like, well, yeah, but I feel like I'm talking to a tech support agent right now that's reading a script, whereas it's so nuanced, but I could tell he wasn't connected with me. And so that's active listening. But validation would be, he hears the frustration in my voice. He puts himself in my shoes and goes, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding. Like, I'd be so ticked, what are you going to do? What have you tried? Ask more questions. That's what I was looking for. And so while it's nuanced, active listening is quite different from validation because you're connected to the person when you're validating them.
Yeah, and I can definitely see that. I will say this, in reading books on communication, the dialogues in the books, it's hard to write dialogues that are good and that resonate well. A lot of it can seem kind of canned and like, oh yeah, I'm sure if I use this in my real life, this is exactly
Right.
what my wife would respond exactly like this,
Right.
and my world would be solved in, 30 seconds. How do you go about, people that reach out to you, send you emails? How do you go about helping them in more live, real life situations?
That's a great question. That is the hardest. It was one of the hardest parts about writing the book is that I found the same thing, right? You read these books and the dialogue sounds so canned and so fake. And I realize that mine is going to come across like that to some people, but I tried really hard to make it sound a little more authentic. But at the end of the day, I do just encourage people to speak however they speak. Just because I wrote it a certain way in the book doesn't mean you have to use those words. The most important principles are you feeling empathy for them, right? Are you actually connected with them? And I give a few examples or a few tips on how to develop empathy if you're struggling with it. And then are you refraining from giving advice and things? And I just find that as they kind of adopt the principles rather than the direct how-tos and exact verbiage, it just flows for them. And so truthfully, I haven't had many people say, and I tried, but it sounds canned. Thankfully, most people who've written in fact, everybody who's written in just says it works. I'm shocked, but it works. And so I can only assume that they're not reading my scripts, but that they're just saying it how they feel it,
So what if somebody's not validating what you say and it's a loving, close relationship? Is there, as the person who's speaking, like when you were telling your girlfriend, you knew that she cared, right? Mm-hmm. But she wasn't validating what you were saying. As the speaker, can you take it upon yourself to, I don't want to say need the validation less, but not take it personally?
In fact, it's a great question because literally I was dealing with it just this last week where every human needs to feel connection. Every human needs to feel accepted. That doesn't mean that you deserve it from everyone you talk to, right? So I think that it's a great question because not everyone you're going to talk to is going to validate you. Frankly, not everyone you're going to talk to is going to care about you. Hopefully, if it's an intimate relationship, they do. And so I found there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. For me personally, having written a book now on it, most people ask me about it, and so I'm able to just explain it to them. So with my close family, with my girlfriend, we can just use the word validation and say, hey, I'll try to even just come into it and say, hey, I just really need some validation right now. Do you have a couple minutes, right? And they understand where I'm going with that. For people who don't know that, I personally just kind of let it go, and then I call someone who I know can validate me and help out. And then I think it's also important to note that you can validate yourself. In fact, that's one of the most consistent bits of feedback I've received on the book, where I talk about self-validation. And I think one of the last chapters, and I don't spend a ton of time on it, but I had a close friend of mine who, she was actually one of the beta readers of the manuscript. And she wrote me this huge email after she finished it and said, okay, this book is amazing. The principles are fantastic. I have to say though, that last little bit on self-validating is what has changed my life, because she had just been recently diagnosed. I don't remember what the disease is, but literally shuts her life down. Like she had to drop out of, she was done with school. She had to quit her job. She couldn't go out and do much. And she was wrestling with all of this, but she was feeling like she, quote unquote, shouldn't be sad. She was trying really hard to tough it out. She was trying hard to shut down all of her emotions and just deal with it. And she realized that you can self-validate. It's important to say, you know what, this does suck. This is hard. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. All of that kind of stuff, she said, just completely freed her and it allowed her to process the emotion that she had otherwise been closing off. And so she didn't even need validation from other people. She was able to just self-validate and go, you know what, this is tough.
And what happened after she processed things?
She, I am obviously not in her head, but we've talked numerous times since. And she keeps bringing it up. She just says, you know what, I've learned to accept this. I've learned to be happy. She started a blog. She's sharing her story with people now and trying to be a light to others. And so I don't think that I can take credit for that change, but her turning inward and being more compassionate on herself and allowing herself to feel the weight of what was happening, I think is what enabled her to move on.
And I think you can take credit for at least expediting the process, giving the tool that allowed that to happen, right?
Sure.
Maybe she comes to the same conclusion. Maybe she works on it, but it takes much longer. And finding that efficiency, I think that's awesome. It's empowering. I spoke a couple episodes back about emotions, feeling emotions, and a lot of times we're socially conditioned. We get hurt, tough it out, put some dirt on it, whatever. Right. When I watch a movie, if the movie makes me cry or upset, my first response is hide my face. Don't be strong. You know,
it's not manly.
Right. And I remember just thinking why? Why am I doing this? I question everything. Why do I feel like I need to cry, hide my face if I'm upset? Isn't it better to just feel the emotions that are appropriate in the moment instead of just burying them? So yeah, I think it ties in very well with validation. It's accepting the emotions as they come, knowing that everybody deals with, everybody struggles, everybody has to overcome something in their life, and it's okay.
Absolutely. And if I may jump in, I love that you bring that up, because I think that's at the core of why society is so starved for validation, because we're taught from such an early age, especially as young boys, and now, as men, we're still taught that you should bury your emotions, right? That you shouldn't feel a certain way. You should just be stoic and rock solid. And that's not healthy for anyone. Just a couple of weeks ago, I got an email from a reader. This man had been in the military for years. He said, in the quote unquote hyper masculine world of the military, we're taught to shut off our emotions like a light switch, right? Just don't feel anything. And he said that had destroyed his relationships. He just had such a hard time connecting with people, because you have to be vulnerable if you're having an intimate relationship, right? You have to be willing to feel and then talk about your emotions. And that's not always a sexy topic, right? Hey, I'm feeling embarrassed. Hey, I'm feeling angry, that's not an easy thing to bring up. I still struggle with it after 5 years of therapy, but you have to. And if we don't do that, then that's where addictions come from. That's where all this bottled up anger and frustration comes from. That's where relationships erode, because humans have emotion. That's what makes us human. And if we share that, that's where we connect.
Why do these emotions come up? Due to the invalidation. Why does it come out in addiction? Why does it come out in all these negative ways?
Because it's uncomfortable. I think we don't bury happiness. We don't bury excitement. I think the only feelings we bury are the ones that we're embarrassed to talk about, or the ones that we don't want to feel, right? So oftentimes I found that validation is critical for raising children, because little kids don't know how to deal with emotions, and they're scary, right? For a kid, right? If the kid gets scared, he is, backing away from the roller coaster, running away from the TV, he doesn't know how to deal with that. And so we have to teach our children, that it's okay to feel all of that, because if we don't, then they just hide it, right? If my son sees dad as, well, he doesn't feel this, so I shouldn't feel that. He doesn't learn to talk about it. And if you bury your emotions, they fester, right? It's one of the first things that you go through in therapy, right? Is you got to learn to identify what you're feeling, because if you don't, it just stays there and it gets worse. But it's amazingly freeing when you can say, you know what, I'm really ticked right now. I'm pissed off because X, Y, and Z happened. And if you can talk to someone about that, you let it go. If you just push it down and say, no, it's fine, no, it's fine, no, it's fine, it doesn't go away, and it causes other issues down the line, because now you have to numb out. You don't have to, but if you want the pain to go away and you can't talk about it, you got to turn to something else, whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, gaming, it could be anything. But I think a lot of our world today turns to some other way to numb out, because we don't know how to deal with the uncomfortable emotion.
And we do have a lot of ways to numb out in the current world that we live in. All of those things that you mentioned are pretty accessible, extremely accessible. The addiction that you overcame with pornography, more accessible now than any time in human history, which means that it's going to be a bigger problem than any other time in human history. Okay, so you went to therapy, you overcame through the process. You started hiring life coaches and different coaches to help you in various facets of life. Can you tell me which of the coaches had a major impact in your life, or the most impact?
So I actually had only one official coach, and it was my therapist. I just
Okay.
started calling her a coach
Okay.
because
Right.
because pretty soon we stopped talking about the addiction, and for a number of years it was just, how do I deal with the situation at work? How do I deal with the situation with my girlfriend or my siblings or whatever? And so that was where I just learned, validation, of course, was a big part of that, but that's just where I learned how to handle conflict, right? Where I learned how to have difficult conversations. It's still tough for me to bring up an uncomfortable topic with people, but those are the skills you got to have. I mean, at this point, I manage a team of roughly 20 people at work, and giving feedback when someone underperforms is not fun. And so I got coaching on how to do that. Right? I have coworkers come to me and they're ticked about something. I've learned over the years how to handle those situations.
How was being a manager in the beginning?
It was tough, honestly, especially because of how I came into it. I mean, we had a very small marketing department at that time. In fact, it was me, one graphic designer, and one other part-time employee. And I was like, gosh, 20, I think I was 23, and through a series of events, I was promoted to manager, but the other guy was 20 years my senior. And the other person was a friend, a close friend. So suddenly I'm the manager, quote unquote. And I'm like, how do I put my foot down now and not be a total jerk? And how do I also not just be this guy who has no backbone and just does whatever anybody wants? And that was tough for me. So it took me a number of years to really hone my managerial skills. And I'm still learning. I'm far from the perfect manager. It was difficult starting out.
But if your team's gone from 3 to 20, then I think that's a reflection that things have gone okay, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
Things have gone in a positive direction, and hopefully will continue to go in a positive direction. Can you tell me about your daily? You've mentioned that your daily practice has changed and grown over the years. Can you tell me in some ways that it's changed?
Sure. So years ago, I've always been very goal-oriented, very driven. I'm always looking to start new businesses, to find ways to be self-supportive and to improve my relationships, all of that. So every year around Christmas time, really coming into the new year, I set goals, I set resolutions like the rest of the world. But also like the rest of the world, I realized that I wasn't really hitting my goals as consistently as I wanted. And so I think it was 3 years ago now, I sat down and I had some real talk with myself and said, something's got to change here, right? Because I'm not exercising. I'm not, getting through as many books as I want. I'm not, honestly, getting this book forward. At that time I felt like I needed to write this book, but how do I write a book? And so what I decided to do was put everything in the morning, everything that mattered to me, do it first. And because if I exercise after work, I'm exhausted, so I don't go. If I try to write, my brain's fried, not going to happen. Things come up, right? So the long and short of it is I put everything I could into my morning routine, and I started super basic. It was like, do 20 minutes exercise, bare minimum. Heck, I think I started with 5 minutes, which was a joke. This is stupid. How's this going to help? But it got me in the habit. It was 5 minutes of reading a good book. It was 5 minutes of meditating, and I just thought, come hell or high water, I will at least do 5 minutes of these things before I do anything else. And I got addicted to that. I think maybe that's a healthy addiction where I was like, this is nice, like checking stuff off, taking care of myself. And so pretty quickly it grew into 20 minutes exercise. I let myself flex to an hour. Then I was reading for 15 minutes. I was just writing for 15 minutes. And I was doing small chunks. I don't know if you've read the book, The Slight Edge or The Compound Effect. Fantastic books. They both basically say the same thing in different ways, but it's small actions over time lead to tremendous results. And you hear that and you're kind of like, yeah, of course. But I'm living proof of that. In 15 minutes a day of my morning routine, I wrote the whole rough draft of my book in 6 months. And I had to take more time after that to edit it, but wasn't the best shape of my life. I had read 20 or so books. I was on top of the world. And so I maintained that routine almost perfectly for a number of years. I've since slacked off on that, and I've been wanting to get back to it because it was powerful to just put myself first every morning and make sure that I'm focusing on the things that matter.
I'm sensing a theme. I'm seeing Michael not getting the results that he wants, not being able to do what he wants, and then taking action, becoming introspective, figuring out how the hell do I implement these things into my life? Why do I keep failing? It's very commendable. You're coming on my podcast because you wrote your book, because you are this type of person that is going to overcome. that when faced with obstacles, everybody, we're all faced with obstacles every single day. And self-doubt. Can you tell me about some of the self-doubt that you dealt with when you were writing your book? Because I know it had to be there.
Well, yeah, it was real. I still feel it, frankly, with podcasts, because I listen to a lot of podcasts. I love podcasts. And most of the time they're these big experts, right? Or these doctors or these psychologists. And so even setting out to write the book, I was like, I ignored it for a number of months, where the thought first came to mind after I had seen this validation work like magic over and over and over. It's like, this stuff's amazing. You should write a book. Are you kidding me? Like, who am I to write a book? Like, I'm not a writer. I've never written a book, let alone I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a big life coach. I'm not anybody to anybody. And yet, literally the thought kept coming. So many experiences where I joke in the book about how validation felt like a superpower, because I was able to diffuse tense situations at work. I was much closer with the girls that I was dating. My family relationships were getting stronger. I mean, left and right, it was changing lives. And so finally I decided I just got to do it. Like, I can't keep ignoring it. And so overcoming that self-doubt was just starting and trusting that God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, would just guide my efforts. And it was pretty cool, because I felt that. There were a lot of times when I wanted to give up, when my shame got the better of me. I would literally spend 10 hours on one page, like, no joke, just going back and back and back, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist. And so I didn't want to put something out there if it wasn't right. And so that self-doubt got the best of me at numerous times, but ultimately it just came back down to one foot in front of the other, keep going. This is going to help people. And it's been humbling and exciting to see the success that it's had.
When you felt that self-doubt, what were some of the steps that you took to be like, all right, Michael, get your shit together. You got to do this. Like, let's go,
Yeah. I had to just keep thinking back on the difference it was making in my life. Honestly, like I just had to keep thinking, like, truly I wrote it to help people. And that sounds cheesy. That sounds cliche, but I mean it when I say it, because I didn't want to be an author. I didn't want to, I wasn't trying to make money off the book. I had no clue. I just always heard you don't make money off books, you make pennies, but I'm like, okay, whatever. And so that's what kept me going. It was two-pronged. It was that. Then there were certain times when it was just my own, like, I am not going to quit. I'm going to do this.
What better driving force for creating anything is there than wanting to help other people? It's very easy for these endeavors to turn into very self-serving. And I've dealt with this in the podcast. It's I bring these interesting people on, and I have specific questions that I want to know. And then I ask myself, does anybody else care? Like, I think I'm the only one. Like, this is, if I'm going to hire them as a coach, hire them as a coach. But when you're interviewing, when you're talking to these people, you need to be serving the audience, right? And
Sure,
you need to be serving my guest, which is you. And so for anybody out there that is creating something, make sure you're serving your audience. Don't make it self-serving. I've read books that are very self-serving, that don't provide a lot of value, that are basically, look how great I am and look how smart I am. And I listened to a podcast the other day where this guy, he talked about losing $1 million. He talked about knowing all these rich people. And then he also mentioned that that he has a picture in his room that says radical humility. And I'm like, this doesn't add up, right? It doesn't, it's not coming together for me. So I think that your book already is probably going to take you places where you didn't realize it was going to take you. Do you have any examples of that in your life as far as finishing the book?
Oh man, honestly, it's been crazy. It took off. Like, it hasn't been out. It's almost been out a year now, and I self-published. I recorded the audiobook myself, coded the Kindle version myself, made the hardcover just for vanity reasons because I wanted to hold the hardcover, but paperbacks, so I got all the formats, I got everything. And I'm a marketer by trade, so I thought I sure as hell better be able to market my own book. Like, if I can't do this, then I should retire. But I didn't know, right? So Google, YouTube, all this kind of stuff, I push it out. And honestly, my thought was, I'm gonna finish this. I'm going to rocket it to the top of the bestseller list for one day at least. That's all I want. One day, just like a screenshot at vanity, and then I'm going to let it be done, right? God, you do with it what you will. Like, I'm done. I did my part, And so I did that, made it to number one. That was awesome. Got the screenshot. And then I took a week and I was like, of course it dropped away from number one. And I just thought, there we go. But then I was, it started to sell a little more. And I was talking to my parents about it. My dad's like, you can't just leave it here, right? Right? Like, the world needs to know this, and you got to reach that tipping point with the book. And I didn't want to hear that because I had just spent the last 2.5 years of my life writing the stupid thing. And I thought, I'll be done. I shouldn't say stupid thing. It's a good book. But I knew he was right. And so I started pushing it a little more. I started, just doing more marketing behind it. And it was incredible because I started to hit that tipping point where I got those reader emails. The reviews started coming in. Now for the past several months, it's consistently a number one bestseller, genuinely, on Amazon and in numerous categories. And it's being translated. It just finished translation to Spanish. It's being translated into Vietnamese, of all languages. Just yesterday, a Korean publisher reached out to me. And this is all within 1 year. And so now I'm shaking my head saying, holy cow, like, clearly, it's exciting to me because obviously I knew it was valuable. Obviously it was helping my life and I wanted to share it with others, but I didn't know if anyone else would care. But sure enough, I'm finding that people are starved for this. And it is the most fulfilling. It's the best part of my day to get those emails where they say, you changed my relationship. I got an email from a woman in Russia, some tiny little town in Russia I'd never heard of, saying, I just read your book and my friend came to me and she was upset with something about work. And I was able to just use the steps in your book and it totally worked. And those are the stories where I'm like, it literally has changed the direction of my life. And so now here we are talking. I'm wanting to share it because I truly believe it can transform relationships.
Bless your dad.
Right?
Bless your dad for pushing you because he was absolutely right. And I dealt with the same thing when I had my book published and I got it and I was holding it. And my initial thought, I'm not a marketer by trade. I'm horrible at, I'm going to say I'm horrible. I'm horrible at that sort of, at the self-promotion sort of thing. It's very anti my nature. But the first thought when I was holding it in my hand was, oh, I got to tell people now, right? I can't
just stop there.
Yeah. The work has only just begun, but how does it feel knowing that your book is going to be translated to all these different languages and helping people in different cultures and all that sort of thing?
I'm in awe, honestly. It's it's my favorite thing every morning to hop on and check the reviews and check emails and respond to people because I never thought I would be here. And the coolest thing, to bring the interview full circle here for a minute, is I've grown to be very grateful for my addiction, right? Because the very thing that I hated about myself for most of my life is what has brought me here today. And now I'm helping people like I never, and the irony is it doesn't even have to do with my addiction. That was just what drove me to get the help that I needed. And then after that, my family started going to my therapist, not necessarily to work on an addiction, but just because I was like, guys, this is awesome. Like, you gotta learn this. And so it changed the way my family talks with each other. And now my siblings and my parents, they're helping people in different, it's so cool to look back on it and connect the dots and to realize that what I thought was a horrible failure in my life was actually the very path I needed to be on to help hopefully millions.
Awesome, man. What do you think your 21-year-old self would say if he saw you today?
I'd have a lot more self-compassion, honestly. I would better recognize that, hey, this isn't just Michael, you suck. There's a bigger purpose here. So keep going with the recovery. Reach out, find the help you need, and then reach out to others. I would basically just have that self-compassion and say, there's a bigger purpose here. Don't get so down on yourself. Because I struggle with shame hardcore most of my life, and I still do, right? I have awkward podcast recordings and I'm like, crap, I could have said that better, all that kind of stuff. But I think that's the biggest shift is if that 21-year-old self could see me now, I think that would give me a lot more patience and a lot more self-compassion.
Right. And there's hope, right? Good things are going to happen when you face these struggles in your life and you reach out and you start taking action towards getting help. Amazing things can happen. Despite not being an expert, you can write a book and it can get translated into multiple languages and be on the way to helping, like you said, potentially millions of people. It's incredible. It's an incredible story.
And I will say, that's why I love what you're doing with your podcast here is, for any listeners listening that are struggling with something, and it's probably everybody to some degree or another, but if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I can't get over whatever this is, I think exactly what you said there. Like, ask yourself, what could this be preceding, right? What could this be leading me to? What is my next step? If I fast forward 10 years, how could I turn what I'm dealing with right now into something that blesses millions?
All right. So let's move to the lightning round. Lightning round of the conversation. So what's a current large goal that you're working on?
Retire by 40. I'm 30 years old right now. And I talked about every December I set goals. Past couple Decembers, I've been looking at, I like my job, but I don't love my job. I want to have financial freedom by 40 or earlier. And so I've built out a very specific plan, year by year, month by month, what I have to do to get there. A big chunk of that is real estate investing. So that is one of my biggest focuses right now is building a real estate portfolio and preparing to retire by 40.
What are you going to do once you're retired?
Probably a lot of what I'm doing right now, just of my own free will and choice. So I don't know if I'll write more books. I certainly am not going to sit around and play golf all day. That's not my nature. I'm always needing to create and do something. But I feel this insatiable need to build a source of passive income and such that I can spend the time that I want with my family, that I can always make sure I put my own personal health first, and that I am, so cheesy, but I can't think of a different word, fulfilling my purpose, in life, rather than just feeling like I'm working a 9 to 5.
I don't think it's cheesy. I mean, my big thing is helping people live a life that's true to themselves, and fulfilling your life purpose is definitely, it's in the same ballpark, right? Nobody wants to get to the end of their life and realize that the person that they thought they would be in their future self wasn't how they ended up. We all, I think everybody, if you look out 10 years, you have an idea of how life will be or how things will be going or how you want it to be going. But who wants to get to their end of their life and be like, well, shit, I lived a life that I didn't really love. And what happened? And
you've got to take control of that, right? I think a lot of people do hit that point, that oh shit moment where it's like, oh crap. And that happens unless you take charge, unless you do something about it.
Right. And like I say, over and over and over and over again, nobody's going to save you. Because the reality is you have to save you. Nobody cares about your dreams. Nobody cares about your dreams or your stuff more than you do. So you have to take action and you have to make it, get it done yourself.
I'm looking over at a quote on my wall right here. One of my favorite quotes of all time: build your own dreams or someone else will hire you to build theirs. The best advice I've received.
There you go. Are you a rabid fan of any blogs or resources? And if so, which ones?
It doesn't entirely relate to this conversation, but I'm an avid life hacker reader. Just like to find the best ways to do anything in life, the best products and things. As far as personal development goes, I love Self-Made Man is a recent podcast that I just started listening to. I was listening to Art of Charm for a while, Art of Manliness. I just kind of bounced around to different podcasts. Certainly going to be listening more to yours. And I just find that there's a lot of great value out there. Those are some of my top picks.
I haven't listened to any of those myself.
They're pretty good.
Yeah, so many are good.
There's a lot.
There's a lot of information. There's a lot of good things to listen to. It can be, it can get a little overwhelming.
No question. Yeah.
Do you have any books that you reread every few years? And if so, which ones?
Absolutely. I mentioned two of them, The Compound Effect and or Slight Edge. I read one or the other every couple of years. Another big one is Set for Life. So again, hearkening to my real estate goals, that's one that I recently came across by Scott Trench. That's fantastic. That one literally changed the trajectory of my life. It taught me, it was just such a well-explained, down-to-earth conversation about real estate investing. So I love that one. And then one other that's a little more foo-foo-y is Michael Singer is the author, The Untethered Soul. That's one that it basically takes a lot of Eastern religious, if you will, principles and dumbs it down for us Westerners. It's not like quite the power of now, which is like, don't try to listen to your thoughts, just be your thoughts, and all that kind of stuff that I'm like falling asleep while I'm driving. In this book, The Untethered Soul, he breaks it down in a much more realistic way where he still talks about some of that stuff, but it resonates with me on mindfulness, on learning how to deal with traumatic events or things that we oftentimes store inside ourselves. It's one that I gift to a lot of people because it's a unique book, but quite powerful.
Well, just the concept of validation is confirmation to me that you are mindful, and it's an active thing, developing the presence to be mindful and aware of what people are saying, what you're saying, what you're putting out there. And it's another thing that seems to get talked about a lot on this podcast.
Yeah, it's big.
Yeah, it's
and I'm still working on it.
I think everybody is. And from my daily medication, my medication practice every day.
If there's medication to help me be mindful and more present, let me know.
I find that even if I act in a way contrary to how I want to act, I find myself noticing it before it happens. So I may have an outburst that I'm like, oh God, why did I do that? But I have awareness of it, right? Like in the moment, which I think is the first step towards self-improvement. So what actions do you regularly take that allow your soul to breathe?
I know what actions I should be taking to allow my soul to breathe, and that's mindfulness. It's silence. Again, with everything that I have going on in my life, I'm very much a go, 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 check more stuff off. I've got to-do lists for miles, and I thrive on that. I get a lot of satisfaction from that type of stuff. And yet I also know that I have to take time to drive without podcasts, without books, without music, and just let that 30-minute drive let my mind go, right? I'll have times in the mornings where I'll just sit and I'll reach for my phone and then have to stop myself. And then I'll 2 minutes later, I'm like, oh crap, work. No, sit here, because I have to have that. And if I don't do it regularly, then I find that my body even, and certainly my mind, starts forcing me to go there because I start dropping the ball on things. I feel so scattered. I can't connect with people unless I take that time to just be and let my mind do its thing and process stuff.
How does it feel after you unplug for a specific period of time?
For the first 10 to 20 minutes, it sucks because I can't shut my mind down. But once I'm successfully able to just kind of relax, I find it easiest in the mornings, right when I wake up, honestly. Something I've started doing more often, where before I even get out of bed, I'm awake, but I'll just lay there and just kind of, feel my breath and just kind of soak in the true present moment. And it's amazing. It's a great feeling. And so I'm trying to figure out how to bring that feeling in the middle of a workday, right? Or after a stressful conversation. Like if I can get back there, I feel like that's the way that we should all live in life. The ideal.
I have no doubt that you're going to figure it out.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
If there's awareness of the problem, I have no doubt you're going to start working towards solving that specific problem. And when you can solve getting that awareness in the middle of a workday, let me know. Let me know first, because it's important to me.
Yeah.
Have you ever strongly believed something in life only to reverse course later on? And if so, what led to that change?
Ooh, that's a big question.
I save it for the end.
Yeah, the hardest question for the last. I'll say this, since we've talked about it a lot on the podcast already, going back to the early days, well, maybe the later days of my addiction, I believed, I don't think I was taught this, but I believed for most of my life that I was a bad person because I was struggling with something. And I had a lot of fear around that. And I carried that up until just the past few years, where I always felt like I had this side of me that if people found out about, they wouldn't love me. They wouldn't, they would judge me, and all that kind of stuff. And maybe they would, but the shift for me, and I couldn't really point to a specific time, but I just started to realize, what, this is just part of being human. Like everybody struggles with something. And that was very freeing for me to give myself permission to be human and to say, okay, I don't want to excuse the behavior. I still want to change it of my own free will and choice. because I know that there's more light out there, but I don't have to get down on myself because I stumble, because I go back to certain things. And that was a huge turning point for me, and something that I preach to a lot of other people who are going through difficult things and say, hey man, yeah, that's hard, right? Validate them. Like, it sucks. And you're just one of a billion people going through something similar. So cut yourself some slack here, get up, dust yourself off, and keep going. And if you trip and fail every week for the rest of your life, who cares? Keep going, keep trying.
When it comes to this sort of thing, I'm right there with you, but how do you deal with outside judgment?
I'm not perfect at it, but one of the big things from therapy, at least from reading with my therapist, is understanding what stuff is someone else's crap and what stuff is your crap, right? So realizing that everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but truthfully, I think everybody has a certain amount of shame in them. And oftentimes they'll get triggered about something in you. And so if somebody's judging me because I've tripped and fallen and failed and whatever, like, if they're going to say something rude to me about that, that's all about them. Like, clearly they have something inside themselves that they're not happy about, or that they're threatened by, or that I don't know the reasons, and I don't really need to know the reasons. All I need to know is, for whatever reason, they have something they're dealing with. That's about them, not about me. And so that is the biggest, I think one of the most important things that we all need to learn in life is learning how to be confident and comfortable in our own skin, regardless of what other people say. And that absolutely does not come natural to me. And so it has been, years of therapy, lots of failure in that regard, right? Somebody says something or whatever, and I get all worked up, and I got to call someone and say, hey man, can you help me through this? Here's what I'm feeling, right? I have to be real about my emotions, talk through it. But it gets easier and easier each time as I just go, you know what? That's too bad you feel that way. I'm feeling good right now, so I'm going to move on with my life, And if I can do that, maybe they're still all worked up over it, but that ruins their life. It doesn't have to ruin mine. I'm ultimately the person who gives people power to control me. And if I can hold on to that more and just be confident and happy in my own right, that's freeing.
It's a great answer. And don't take things personally. One of the 4 agreements, which I think I talk about every one of my podcast episodes as well, but it always applies.
Totally.
It's a very, very important book. And you ruined my last question about if you could share one truth with the world, what can it be? So
we'll just ruin it. I got ahead of you there. We just pre-answered it. Yeah.
Pre-answered my question. There you go. So Michael, where can my audience find you on the interwebs?
Best place is probably my website. It's Michael S. Sorensen, SEN.com. I post periodic blog post updates about all sorts of different things in life, relationships, or general life tips. Or you're also welcome to reach out to me via LinkedIn, Michael Sorensen. On there, I'd love to connect with anybody, answer any other questions that people might have.
And check out your book. Give your book a plug right here at the end as well.
Yeah, it's I Hear You, the surprisingly simple skill behind extraordinary relationships. And it's available on Amazon and on audible.com.
And it only takes about 3 hours to read, easily consumable, and can make a massive difference in your communication skills. So check it out. My friend, it's been great having you on the show. I appreciate your time and energy. I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Brad. Appreciate the opportunity.
All right, man. Have a good day.
Thanks. You too.
Next time on the Process Podcast, author V.E. Schwab.
So I very slowly began to tie her to the chair she was sitting in, but
oh my God.
Starting from the ground up, so she didn't quite notice it at first. And she noticed it. And I mean, look, I was 8. I wasn't great at tying knots, but she got unsettled enough by the experience that she then locked herself on the back porch and called the neighbors. And the best part of all of this is that she then didn't call my parents, though. So my parents came home a couple hours later after she finally had come back inside the house, and they asked how everything had gone, and she was like, oh, it went fine. And then as soon as this babysitter left, the neighbors started calling to make sure that everything was okay. And my parents were like, what on earth did you do? And I was like, nothing. We were just hanging out. We were just playing games.
Don't forget to subscribe, because this is an episode you do not want to miss.